Welcome back to the Smart Driving Cars podcast. Thanks for tuning in once again. This edition is made possible by CARTS, the Corporation for Automated Road Transportation Safety, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to safe and high-quality mobility for all. I'm Fred Fishkin, along with the Faculty Chair of Autonomous Vehicle Engineering at Princeton University, Alan Kornhauser. Good morning, Alan.
Hey, good morning, Fred.
And joining us this week, we are so happy to welcome Missy Cummings, Professor of Engineering and Computer Science at George Mason University and former Senior Advisor for Safety at NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. She was also among the first female fighter pilots in the Navy. Thank you for taking time with us, Missy.
It's so good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So great having you, Missy.
Well, from the New York Times this week, this headline: car makers are pushing autonomous tech. This engineer wants limits. That engineer is you, and the concern here is that drivers, quoting the article, are putting too much trust in systems like Tesla's autopilot, and regulators need to restrict their use. And this stems from a document you sent last fall to colleagues at NHTSA. You presented the findings yesterday, I think, at the University of Michigan. Dive into it for us, Missy.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, so while I was at NHTSA, I really spent the bulk of my time working with the standing general order. So this is the legal order that requires all the manufacturers to report an autonomous vehicle crash if the autonomy is engaged within 24 hours. You can go to the website and read more all about it. And one of the things that I noticed just in looking at the crash data, which is available to everyone here listening, is that there seemed to be an issue with speed, meaning that I noticed that cars seemed to be speeding more often when they were on driving assist and then getting into crashes. So I basically started to look at that data and break it out. And indeed, you know, depending on how you want to parse the data, it is true that people just in general are getting into more crashes. Now, and when I say that into more crashes, I mean, we're looking at a crash data set from 2020 and then looking at the SGO crash data set. So this is why you can compare them, because it's apples to apples for crash data. Understanding that this is a very early study, the numbers are still very low, so we're not saying that there's any kind of statistical guarantee here, but there's certainly a trend where people are crashing more often when they're on ADAS systems, and it is likely because they're speeding. So people are setting the speeds. You know, I cannot tell you the number of times I saw a report where somebody had set 74 and a 65, or 64 and a 55, right? Yeah, and Alan is raising his hands like, I do it too, right? I'm just as guilty. Oh, the cops aren't going to pull me over if I'm only 9 miles above the speed limit. So it turns out, okay, so that's a very common thought in drivers' brains, and then they program it into their autopilot or Super Cruise or Blue Cruise, what have you. And then they relax and they go hands-free because they're told that they can go hands-free. And the problem with that, as opposed to a normal driver setting 9 miles over the speed limit on ACC, is I think people are really just checking out their brains. They're going hands-free and then they're going minds-free and sometimes feet-free. And then that's setting up a really bad dynamic where it's taking people far more, you know, even if it's only a couple of seconds more to intervene when something bad happens, 2 seconds at 74 miles per hour can be a killer.
Yeah, if we can back up just a second, you know, hands-free versus feet-free. You know, from just my own personal experience without doing any tests with anybody else, asking any questions, I find these things, the feet-free business for me seems to be a lot more valuable than the hands-free business. Okay, because my problem with my feet may not be the problem with your feet or anybody else's feet. I may be the only driver that's like this. You know, the keeping the car going at a constant speed or keeping the car at a constant separation to me, is separation's not as tough. The speed is tough because I have to look down and see the speed, or I have to focus on what is on my windshield as opposed to what's on the road ahead. And then I have to jiggle my foot to be able to do that control process. And I just find the fact that, I mean, my love for intelligent cruise control is, I just said it. Now, of course, I said it 9 over, as you mentioned. It's really bad, I know, but I mean, I'm sorry, I apologize, but
Please, New Jersey state troopers, don't listen to this podcast.
yeah, well, I mean, the poor state troopers, if they pulled everybody over that was doing,
Right.
I mean, on 295 here on New Jersey Turnpike, the speed limit's 55. You do 55 unless there's congestion on the turnpike, you're I would claim you're a menace. So in some sense, we have to get to what is the right speed, but there's no doubt that, to me, there's no doubt what you've pointed out here is everybody's going a heck of a lot more faster now than they were pre-COVID, and we were going too fast pre-COVID too. But that's, again, just my own brain out there in the stream, and without doing an academic data, whatever, I don't even know where I'd find it. I mean, we could go to INRIX. INRIX sits there and collects it. They have collected it. I'm sure maybe somebody at the University of Maryland's already gone in there and basically drawn up the distributions and shown that, those distributions are very different right now than what they were pre-COVID. Maybe.
Well, and I think
you may have found that. Yeah, go ahead.
I think the big difference though here is everybody's speeding. Everybody without autonomous cars are speeding. In fact, speed is in the National Roadway Safety Strategy for the US DOT, it's highlighted as we've really got people's speed under control. So we know speed is a problem. But I think the difference between everybody speeding in a regular car and everybody speeding in an autonomous equipped car is that people in Blue Cruise, Super Cruise, they're being told they can go hands-free, and hands-free equals mind-free. And the foot problem, it's not just that you're taking your foot off the gas. Look, I tow a retro RV. So I know that when I tow my RV, I need to be able to relax my foot. There's a difference between keeping your foot just behind the accelerator and then putting your foot somewhere else in the wheel well. So we see people are likely tucking their feet up underneath the seat, kind of pushing their feet off to the side because they're told they're hands-free and they can relax. And I think people are really getting relaxed. And then the problem with that is when the autonomy fails, that people have to very quickly get to the right position. And we're seeing a lot of over-controlling, meaning people are jerking the steering wheel too much and at high speeds, this is deadly. And then we're seeing people hit the accelerator instead of the brake. And so it suggests that people's feet are, they're having problems with proprioception. They don't recognize the position of their body in terms of where they think it is and where their foot should be because they're in an unusual position.
Well, I think you point out you very poignantly the issue. With me, it's always been, I'll have to admit, is I keep my foot close. And in fact, very close, because I'm scared to death of this stuff. And I have been from day one and continue to be today. And I think that people need to realize, as you've tried to point out here, that in fact, you have to remain alert. These things, you just don't know when they're going to, who knows what. And so I think that's what's, at least part of what's really important about what you're pointing out here. Putting your foot under, up underneath or somewhere else, or resting it on the window, or who knows what. I mean, that's crazy stuff.
But let me chime in, Alan. If you can drive feet free, pedal free, where do you put your feet that's safe? Because hovering over isn't very comfortable for very long. At least I don't think. If you put them on the floor, there's got to be a difference in reaction time, even if they're fairly nearby, right?
Well, I totally agree. And I think this is the thing that we need to start thinking of is when you're supervising an autonomous car, there are really two distinct forms of readiness, physical readiness and mental readiness. And I agree with you that, you know, I do think most people in some kind of cruise control setting, they keep their foot somewhere near the pedals. So indeed, I'm working on a study that's looking at this right now. Like, how much reaction time does it add when you have people in various unusual positions inside of the driver's seat? But there's no question that, and you can see this because of the pedal confusion, that people are they're trying to do an emergency brake maneuver and they hit the accelerator. And of course, this only makes it worse.
What are your thoughts, Missy? You're talking about this misbehavior, I guess is the way Alan would typically characterize it. Not just with this, but with driving overall during COVID, post-COVID, and the statistics that we've seen, the horrible statistics. Do you have any thoughts about what's behind that?
Well, you know, I think that for many people, driving is an outlet. Indeed, I do wonder when we start talking about the autonomous vehicle market, just in general, and I'm talking now about self-driving, not about ADAS. You know, people in America have a real love affair with their cars. And for them, it may be that we're going to continue to struggle to get people to want to be an autonomous car because there is this emotional connection with their car. And, you know, I mean, the insurance statistics don't lie. Men speed in cars when they're young. You know, by the way, as a former fighter pilot, I have a lot of testosterone, and I got a ton of tickets when I was young. I just, you know,
no,
I know. You know, I mean, I've been there. I know what it feels like to be in a powerful car and to have that car kick in. So I don't even want to take that away from people because I think it's good that you have some, you know, feeling of power or whatever you want to call it. I think COVID, though, you know, gave people, there was just so much a lack of stimulation, if you will, because people were forced to stay at home or what have you. But I think COVID only made the problem a little bit more obvious, which is a clear thing in our country. We actually do have too much of a love affair with our cars. When you look at Europe, their death rates are much lower, even though they have places like the Autobahn. The Germans love pointing out that they can still go fast without having high death rates, and they're correct. I would also like to point out they have different type certifications for their vehicles, and they also have different driver certifications. Getting your driver's license in Germany is much harder than America. So, you know, I think there are real cultural differences. COVID aside, we still tend to have almost a laissez-faire attitude and an entitled sense with our cars. Cars reign supreme. Cars should be able to go wherever they want, and pedestrians and bicyclists come in a very, very distant second and third.
Yeah, on those lines, I don't know how cars are advertised in Europe, but the way cars are advertised here, if you look at the Super Bowl commercials, I don't know what was one of them, you know, drive your car up a riverbed. Okay, they always show the cars never with any other cars around it. You're always going out to whatever and so on. And maybe in those places with nobody else on the road, it might be okay to speed. In Germany, I think if you've driven, I'm sure you've driven on the Autobahn, one of the things that you do no more than once is pass anybody on the right. Okay, you just don't pass anybody on the right. In Jersey, the right lane is the fast lane. It's a completely the amount of misbehavior that takes place, at least what I'd like to suggest, is in the U.S. is just out of control with cars, and it's misbehavior at the wrong time. Maybe you should be able to do 0 to 60 in 1.26 seconds with nobody else on the road. And then it might be only your problem. But if there are some other folks on the road, then that, the system knows that. It sees the other cars. It sees that. And maybe that functionality needs to be turned off. You don't get to it. I mean, there are ways to deal with this, and I think in your article you tried to suggest some of these things, but that's not necessarily going to be all that easy to put these constraints on the way these cars are sold to us. They're an expression of our freedom, our ability to do whatever the heck we want. And I mean, if that's what it is, then we're in trouble here, right?
I hear you.
We're in trouble.
I hear you, and I've been I'm probably, I've turned into a hall monitor, which I'm not the hall monitor type, but
neither am I. But I need to be monitored. I mean, go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm telling you, look. I had the need for speed. I was a fighter pilot. I have gone almost the speed of sound, 25 feet above a desert floor. I know what that's like, right? So I get it. But at the same time, I'm telling you that we need to stop, and I'm a strong advocate for this. If we are going to let people use advanced driving assist systems that do lateral and longitudinal control, my new windmill that I'm tilting at is we need to stop letting people speed. Meaning, if you turn on autopilot or super cruise or blue cruise, your car should legally do whatever the speed limit in whatever their area is. It is just phenomenal to me that we allow this, knowing for sure that people are going to not be paying attention. And so we need to give people that buffer. And it's also in keeping with the law. So, and there is a fine line here. So if you're going to be on cruise control, but you're going to drive, I'm saying we don't have to put that limit in. But if you're going to turn on the automation and we know you're going to go hands-free and minds-free, you should have to obey the law. The computer should have to obey the law.
So if we do that, then I've sort of argued in this thing that now it's the responsibility of the OEM to do that. And if it gets violated, they're then responsible of both the safety and the legal operation of the vehicle. And if it becomes unsafe or it becomes illegal, the ticket goes to them.
Well, I think
they pick it up.
Yeah, this is actually, there's no liability here. My students could insert this line of code in one day, right?
Yes.
The code is when you turn on that system, the system knows what speed limit you're in because they have the mapped interstates, whatever.
Yeah.
It never goes faster than that, ever.
Right.
We could talk about what it meant to pass or whatever, but you should not, and that it can be hard coded, and there's no need to have a liability argument then.
Well, Alan, you've talked before about not only that, but the cars could say, no, you may not tailgate, and these other misbehaviors could be certainly controlled by the vehicles. The technology's there right now, right?
Yeah, it's been there for years. I mean, the breathalyzers have been there for how long that they could interlock so that if, in fact, you were above whatever on a breathalyzer, the car wouldn't turn on. But as you, I think, pointed out in your article quite appropriately, Missy, I mean, to get the OEMs to do this, because they're selling freedom to me. And all of a sudden, the constraint of freedom, does the market disappear? I mean, they would all have to do it. One company doesn't do it. I mean, everybody's going to buy theirs. No. Or, I mean, how do we do this? Or do we, have NHTSA come in there and say, go nuts reaction?
Well, I just, I think, look, if you being forced to do the speed limit when you're letting the car drive is a problem, then, we need to sit back and think about what it is, what kind of, bad behaviors we're encouraging if we don't make the cars obey the laws. So are we saying then that let's just jump ahead 30 years and say we have a ton of autonomous cars running around, and how are we going to do it then? are we going to let the cars break the law or not break the law, right? Because if you let the cars break the law, then it does raise this question of liability. So the answer is going to have to be, and I think the self-driving car companies know this right now, you cannot program the cars to break the law. So asking people or telling people when you're in an advanced ADAS system, and the car's driving itself, it's not going to break the law. I would argue that that is a necessary step to get to the point where we will be in autonomous vehicles one day.
So whenever I've gone down this road, I end up with the issue that, of course, somebody brings out and said the speed limit is not a speed limit. The speed limit is set at 85% of whatever the current speed, whatever the argument has been historically for setting speed limits, blah, 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 blah. And in fact, that the speed limit is set with anticipation that it would be a human responding to this thing, and knowing that humans sort of have a distribution associated with how well they toe the line or don't toe the line, that the speed limits are artificially set low, expecting them to go higher at the 90%, who knows what, of the distribution, or 95% of the distribution, and that is actually the safe speed. People make that argument, as opposed to a computer in which our students write the code. Bam! I mean, that is a hard less than or equal to, boom, no problem. Do we need different rules for things that operate in a more deterministic sense of an algorithm, as opposed to a stochastic sense of a human? What are your thoughts here on that, how to deal with that?
I think if me saying, your car should have to obey the law, and then the argument is, well, there's something wrong with the speed limits, then fine. Let's have another discussion about what are the appropriate speed limits on various roads and access points, right? So those two things can go together. But I think at a fundamental level, we cannot have autonomous cars breaking the law, because that is going to put the OEMs and anybody else who's operating this car, their legal liability is going to go out the roof. So if we already know we're going to have the autonomous cars obey the laws, then why are we letting semi-autonomous cars, where people are definitely not paying attention, why are we letting them break the law? And if we want to change what the law is, then let's have that discussion.
I guess I'm trying to ask the question of, is there a law for algorithms that is different than the law for people? Algorithms are different than people, okay? Even though who knows what wants to build a whatever, and let's not go there. But, we are stochastic entities, whereas I'll claim that algorithm is a deterministic entity. It is beam, 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 beam. I mean, we have a whole legal system that deals with the nuances of whatever and so on, and where there it deals with the gray area of human beings, human behavior, and to me, I think there's an enormous struggle here, because of course, the argument that gets thrown to me when I try to make arguments as you're making is that, oh my goodness, it's going to be you're going to be even more of a safety threat going the speed limit than you are speeding. At least that's the argument I end up.
Yeah, I do not think,
which is a tough question. Go, Missy. Sorry.
Yes, I don't think, I think this is a non-argument. First of all, speed limits are not set based on whether the driver is a computer or a human. Speed limits are set because, in theory, there's a kinetic consequence of having a crash at that point, and the urban density, the obstacle density, if you will, right? So this is why around schools we have 25 miles an hour or less, and on highways you can 75, maybe even 80 or more in other places, right? Because the risk of a crash is reflected in the speed limit. So that shouldn't change whether or not you are in a driverless car or a drivered car. Now, we may want to ask, so if we get to the point where there are so many cars that are autonomous and, and I'm talking way ahead in the future, that we might be able to safely raise the speed limit because that risk of having a crash has gone way down, then fine. Indeed, there's an entire field of risk analysis where people look at these things, right? So
absolutely.
that answer is not now. I think I and every other person would be open to, well, once the vehicles get established and we can have some ideas of risk. But indeed, this is why the Standing General Order was conceptualized, is so we could start to get an idea of the risk. And what it has shown me, at least, is that you are at risk. If you are in an autonomous or a car with an advanced driving assist system, you are at more of a risk to either be killed or injured in a crash than you are in a regular car, primarily because you're speeding.
Yeah, and again, no argument against that. I think that's great, and I think it's wonderful that you've put it out so succinctly, the data and the information that shows that. And I guess my only other comment on that is, I don't want to think about when all these vehicles are going to be out there like this, because I'm not going to live that long. So I'm not going to see it. And so since I only care about what I have a potential of seeing, our challenge right now is getting started with all of this. Our challenge is getting through the initial piece, of which we aren't all killing ourselves with this stuff and just trying to get it started. And I think what you've pointed out is that, my goodness, our behavior with this is just not good, and we need to pipe it back. So that's sort of what I appreciated about what you presented. If I could go to sort of another question, the analog brakes and the stability control that has been in cars since, at least the stability control has been mandated in 2012, if that's correct, in all new vehicles built since 2012. And that's essentially not turn offable. I guess you can go in there somehow and turn it off, but it's not generally, it's on all the time. Is there anything that we can learn as to the success that from the success of NHTSA in implementing that system to then apply it to the intelligent cruise control systems? Was there any discussions about that when you were in NHTSA, or did that come up? Because to me, it seems, to me, that's one of these wonderful systems that, in fact, kicks in when I'm misbehaving and saves my butt. At least that's how I generally look at stability control. If I start going around the curve too fast, who knows what, it figures it out that I'm losing my rear end, and it does this and does that, and I don't even know what it does, and apparently works like heck and keeps me from going out of control. And that's to me, that's a wonderful system, automated system, that it actually goes against what I want to do. I want to go fast around the corner. Kicks in and says, "Hey, Alan, back off. I'm going to save your butt." And after it saves my butt, I'm there. Boy, am I happy. Which is what I would want out of out of these advanced driver assistances, especially the emergency braking systems, which we'll get to and discuss in a minute, because we haven't gotten there yet. But if I can take you there, and you don't mind discussing these things.
Well, yeah, I think, first of all, again, as a person who pulls a trailer, Stability control has saved my butt several times. So I don't think that there's a big debate over whether or not stability control is good or not, or we should have it or not. I think the thing about stability control is for people that they must remember is stability control is still not going to be able to defy the laws of physics.
Yeah.
And I do wonder if people then start to become very sloppy drivers because they think that the car is going to be able to get them out of lots of situations. As far as like what can NHTSA do about it, I'm not aware of any specific programs that are focused on stability traction control. I do think that we should probably have a formal research study in the intersection of autonomous control and stability control, because it's not clear in my mind that I don't know how companies are designing these programs, but are these systems talking to each other, or are they completely independent? Because I do worry that if you have a planning system that feels like it needs to put the car in a particular configuration, but it doesn't understand how the stability and traction control program may or may not be sensing independently, that these two systems could come into conflict. So, maybe there are other people smarter than me who can actually speak more definitively on this, but I do think we probably need to examine that intersection.
Well, it's as if we almost practice this, Missy, but let me see if I can take it one step further than you did. Do the intelligent cruise control systems talk to the emergency braking systems? I mean,
I hear you, and
I don't think they do, and
I
think
agree.
that is tragic. Okay,
I agree.
And what the way I point this out is that if I'm using my intelligent cruise control and I tap my brakes, it turns it off. It turns the whole thing off, and I'm saying to myself, well, what if I didn't tap the brake enough? What if the system thinks that I should be braking harder? It's gone out and said, hey, Alan, you tapped your brakes. See ya. It's all on you.
Right.
Which is not what I wanted to stop I think, at least in I may be, the only guy in the world who taps his brakes that wants to stop accelerating. But I want to stop accelerating, not stop braking harder. I don't even know if I need to brake harder or not. And darn it, don't then throw me overboard and say, hey, you're on your own, guy. And then I'm going to wait until I'm 1.6 seconds to collision, and then I'm going to have all hell break loose and tighten whatever to keep me from booming when the whole thing was progressing out for the last 5 seconds. I mean,
yes.
It drives me nuts. It drives me nuts. And you point out, you point a very good connection that all this should also be in case I'm losing my rear end too. So this whole thing, I mean, the car companies, the OEMs need to get think about in your fighter pilot, as a fighter pilot, all these systems were all independent systems that didn't talk to each other. You couldn't have done Mach 1 at 25 feet. Sorry. I mean, I don't know. I've never been there. I don't know what I'm talking about. Sorry, Missy.
Well, I think that you need to. I think these are complicated systems integration issues that I think we're very. I think we're in a very immature place in terms of automotive systems. That we will eventually figure out how to do this integration. But yes, I am not entirely sure that the AEB, traction control, autonomous drive systems are at the right level of at least awareness of each other. Forget one driving the other, Right now, I'm just talking about, making sure that you understand the relationship between those three systems. I think we're still really at a very immature place.
Well,
Missy, let me ask you on the issue that you talked about in this article about people essentially checking out when they're using the advanced cruise control. Car makers, several, have promoted that they do have driver monitoring systems. Are they not working as intended, or what's the status of that? Is anybody doing it right?
I think that's a great question. This is not a commercial for GN Super Cruise, other than I've been in it. I've driven it. I liked it. I thought they had a really good human machine interaction setup there. So, I think me personally, I think the combination of putting your hands on a steering wheel, making sure your hands are there, and making sure your head and eyes are face forward, that's probably the best we're going to be able to do until we can potentially figure out better technologies that are more reliable. But I just want to make sure people understand that's just kind of a Band-Aid on the problem, because just because your head is face forward and your eyes are face forward, there's still a lot of latitude in where your attention can be. And indeed, this has nothing to say about where your feet are, which we've established is also a problem. So, when you're told you can be hands-free, that's what I try to explain to people, is that equals mind-free. And, if you're on a long car drive and you've set everything up and you're resting one hand on the steering wheel, and you're just kind of thinking about, oh, what am I going to have for dinner tonight? Oh, I got into a bad fight with my girlfriend or boyfriend last night, and you really start rehearsing what it is that happened and what you're going to say to that. I mean, your eyes can be on the road, and that these systems will not be able to detect that your brain is not engaged. And so I think that we are at this place in technology development where we are up against the cognitive limits of humans. You can not pay attention, and you will not pay attention if you think the car is doing a good enough job, even if your eyes are on the road.
Well,
And it magnifies the inattentiveness that just everyday drivers without these technologies are so often guilty of.
Oh, yeah. I mean, by the way, that's not to say that obviously distraction is a huge problem.
yeah, I think what at least I think what you're saying, Missy, is because it's the combinatorial of these things. Because in fact, I have this thing, I'm going to go faster. And all of a sudden, if it kicks you into the I'm going to go faster, guess what? You're screwed. Okay?
Yes.
Because all of a sudden now you're on that slippery slope and you're basically done. I mean, what I like about the stability control is the fact that it's on all the time. And I really don't know that it's on all the time. And I really don't even know that it's going to save me. But all of a sudden, if I do something that takes me out of the envelope of where I'm safe, it tries to bail me out. And in some sense, that's why, from the beginning, I think I've tried to call these things safe driving cars. They're cars that we drive, but have these systems in case somehow we, goof up or something, that are sitting there watching us, but know the right thing to do and don't let us do the wrong thing if it's really going to be a wrong thing. It's not just crossing a line. I can cross a double line if there's no car coming the other way. What's the big deal? But if there's a car coming the other way, that darn thing shouldn't let me do it. It's sort of an argument that I make. Of course I shouldn't go in, but who knows? And it just then, every time I cross a double line when there's nobody coming, and because I had to go around somebody that's triple parked or something like that, the thing's buzzing at me. Guess what that does? It makes me turn the darn thing off. But it was smart enough to know that that was okay. So it shouldn't have beeped. And so I think the OEMs need to be a heck of a lot smarter in these things. It's nice that they've gone out there and developed on their own intelligent cruise control and developed on their own automated emergency braking, but they haven't gone far enough. They haven't integrated these things. They really haven't made it so that, in fact, they're really focused on doing their thing when they should be doing their thing and taking all the information that they really do have and doing it. They haven't gone far enough. We're too early is kind of what I would like to. And in fact, I agree with you. It shouldn't let us speed. I guess we should have a trade-off. We want to go fast. It's on me.
Missy, as a fighter pilot, has been shot at, I think, for suggesting these types of things, has been fighting that battle.
I know.
So is it winnable, Missy? I mean, the idea of us owning cars that are going to say, no, you may not speed, this is et cetera. No, you may not tailgate.
I mean, it's a heavy sigh. I mean, it from a technology standpoint, it's easy. Yeah. From a policy standpoint, it's hard, right? Because the instant you start talking about speed limits, and you can just look at the battle that FMCSA is having right now over putting speed limiters on trucks. So, people in America don't want to have any kind of their freedoms curtailed in any way. So I'm on the fence about this. Like, I think it's winnable. But I think at some point how it's going to be winnable is going to be a combination of maybe regulatory action, but also judicial action. And by that, I mean, at some point, the lawsuits are going to start becoming too much for the OEMs. And I have to tell you, I have a waiting list of lawyers. I cannot do it all. I'd like to help people, when they've had a very serious accident, but there are so many lawsuits pending against Tesla and other manufacturers that at some point, even, Elon Musk's luck is not going to hold, because eventually these are going to start taking traction. And I think at some point, the manufacturers are going to have to realize that either they need to change something or their liability is going to continue to grow because the systems aren't able to at least prevent or mitigate driver abuses. We'll see. I mean, both the regulatory and the judicial component of what I'm talking about take a long time. So I don't expect to see any action on this anytime soon. But I do think that eventually the combination of those two things will cause some change.
Well, I have to agree with you on that also, Missy, because I argue in class, and in class I argue a bunch of stuff that I don't bother go out and collect data on. So therefore, I really shouldn't be arguing in class, but it's my class, so I just do it. Analog brakes, beginning of analog brakes, all kinds of whatever came out about it. Oh, I tried to brake, I pushed hard on that brake and it just wouldn't do it. And it got through all the litigation pieces. Why? Because the system actually worked better. Okay, and I think the same thing has happened with respect to the stability control. Oh my goodness, this thing kicked in and it was the fault of my crash. No, it's been able to go through that. I think what has happened and what you're pointing out now with respect to the intelligent cruise control and the automated emergency braking system and the fact that they don't talk to each other and so on and so forth is probably going to come out to force to actually show that in fact they do induce what you suggest, and they are liable. And I think the OEMs are going to have to make them better so that they don't get themselves into that piece. And that's what will force them to do that and force them to integrate it. I mean, I even have one more that I'd like to discuss with you. Some vehicles have been accused of crashing into other vehicles that are stationary with flashing lights in the road ahead. Did you, at NHTSA, when you were dealing with some of these things, did you ever, is it true that these systems classify objects ahead as either moving or stationary? And if they're stationary, they explicitly disregard them.
So while I was at NHTSA, I didn't participate on any of the Tesla-specific investigations.
Well, I didn't mention Tesla,
yeah.
but
Well,
no, I didn't use the word. But yes,
okay,
go ahead.
but I
yeah,
will.
Yeah, sure. No, and I will too. I don't mind using it.
But I think the question is more general. So it is fundamentally, what can sensors, quote unquote, see? And the way that radar works is that it's basically looking for a Doppler frequency shift. And to get that, it needs movement to quote unquote see something. So Tesla's problems with stationary vehicles are all cars' problems with stationary vehicles, meaning no car using radar. They're all going to be subject to this kind of issue. So what do we do then is we try to figure out how to use other sensors to potentially detect those objects. And this is where vision could be one of those, LiDAR could be one of those, and neither one of those are perfect either. So I think that this is fundamentally just, it's the conundrum of perception. Is you put all these sensors in to try to paint the most comprehensive world model, thus upon which you make decisions. Stationary cars present problems for sure for radar. You try to fill the gap with other sensors. Now, are they being misclassified? The radar, LiDAR, camera, there's the detection problem first. Is something there? And the second problem is, then what is it? It's not entirely clear to me that, if we're talking about emergency vehicles with lights, I don't know, because I didn't participate in the investigation, but if you're not being detected, you can never get to the classification problem. So one would presume it's relatively easy to classify a first responder vehicle, because they do have a different configuration for most cars. That's why they're designed that way. But if you're not detecting them, then it's a moot point.
Well, I guess in my dabbling in this, and of course I've only dabbled because that's all I've ever done is dabble. If you take a scene ahead, you identify objects, and the first thing you want to do is put a position vector, velocity vector, acceleration vector, jerk vector, as many derivatives as you can put on that darn thing. Okay, and the key thing of that is that of course the velocity vector is relative to your nose. And in fact, at least I argue to my students that I can determine that I can do that with stereo. I can do it with a lot of things. And as long as, if I'm following something that is not stationary and I'm going at some speed, oh my goodness, it'll plow through anything ahead. I just stay behind it. I'm not going to hit anything. I mean, that's vehicle follower is almost trivial to do. Okay. If the object is stationary ahead, in other words, I'm approaching it at my velocity, at my speed, which I know very well. I mean, with who knows? I mean, I know that very well. Then I have a conundrum. I can say, can I pass under it or can I pass over it? Otherwise, I'm going to hit it. And as I drive down the road, Pennsylvania Turnpike, New Jersey Turnpike, Cleveland Lane, or whatever. There are all these stationary objects on the road ahead, canopy of trees, overpass, traffic light, traffic signs, all the time. And these sensors pick them up and label them as, hey, that's a stationary object. Its real world velocity is 0. And somehow, I think that buried in that code is, oh my goodness, forget about it. I'm going around a curve, and ahead of me is the guardrail that protects me from going off the side. It's picking that sucker up. And guess what? It labels it as stationary, or at least it should. Yet it disregards it. I have not seen in any of the animation, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, I've not seen in any of the animations that I've seen of any of these systems that have the big screens in the car that show you what the heck's coming on, whether it's Waymo or Schmaymo or Baymo or who knows ho. I've never seen an overpass depicted on that image. Haven't these cars ever passed under an overpass?
Yeah, I mean,
I think they explicitly disregard it. I accuse them of, in their code, explicitly disregarding them because they assume they can pass underneath it.
I think. I think that you're right.
Whoa! I mean, talk about did anybody? I asked Nat Buse, and I'm asking you because Nat was at NHTSA too. I keep asking anybody that I don't know that many people at NHTSA. Has anybody at NHTSA actually really looked at this as to whether or not in their code, an object labeled as stationary gets? I'm only going to use it for SLAM to be able to figure out where I am, because it has to pick those things out. Because otherwise, it uses SLAM to do all that junk. No,
well,
it drives me nuts.
I can't. Well, I mean, I hear you. I can't say. I don't. I mean, I don't know.
All right. I don't know. Maybe somebody will watch our discussion right now, and you're so stupid. Of course they would do it, and I hope so.
Well,
I read through this stuff from the Alain Herzberg crash. Okay. And in that Alain Herzberg, they identified an object as stationary 6 seconds before the crash. That system. What happened? Oh, it must not be there. Restart. Throw it. It's not there. It's stationary. Boom. And I don't know if that's the source of the problem, but my goodness, come on.
Well, I mean, I think being able to correctly label images, whether or not it's stationary, is it something, what is it? I mean, this is just the fundamental problem with computer vision, that even if it is augmented by other sensors, ensuring that you know what it is with the various probabilities, if you are a company that basically rank weights the probabilities, and then everything below 50% is going to be rejected. I mean, there are decisions that I think could be brought into question then.
You shouldn't be in business if you're doing that.
I think a lot of them are.
If it's not fluttering and it's ahead of you, you better not hit it. And if it's fluttering, maybe it doesn't have any mass. But come on, I mean, these aren't. And if you put it in your deep learning, for which you don't even know why in the heck it's doing anything, who knows? And that's real dangerous. They hate me. No, it is.
Well, not as much as they hate me.
It couldn't be that. No, Missy. Look. My wife, Elizabeth, and I were talking about you this morning. I mean, it's just what you've gone through. we're such fans of yours, you can't believe it. Anyway, we certainly thank you for what you're doing, what you've done. Great article in the New York Times. Good place for it. Nice that Cade put it together and put it out there. Keep fighting the good fight.
Thank you. Thank you.
Look,
Let's turn to a couple of other headlines quickly.
But it's
Alan,
all
perhaps.
about trying to provide better mobility for folks and to try to have them live through it. I mean, driving is still a privilege, not a right, and you shouldn't be able to be out there just whacking people and yourself. I mean, it really is in the end pretty darn simple. Yes, Fred.
Let's turn to some other headlines quickly, I think, from the latest Smart Driving Cars newsletter. Zoox, owned by Amazon, has carried passengers on public roads for the first time. They were staffers in Foster City, California. The Zoox vehicles are autonomous, don't have steering wheels or manual controls at all. You're quoted, Alan, in the Dallas Express on this story.
Yeah, they asked me for a quote. I think it's great. Okay. They don't point out in there they have an attendant. They better have an attendant. I'm sure they do. Okay. They have to have an attendant. I mean, absolutely. And I'm sure they do. And the fact that they did put together what I call a special purpose vehicle that is really focused on trying to provide mobility to folks. Not that any of us would buy it, but to provide mobility to folks who desperately need good mobility. And do it in potentially affordable way in a very constrained operational design domain that both serves the societal good. Is I applaud them and I invite them to come to Jersey. I mean, the number of people that don't have access to a car and really need the opportunity to not necessarily go very far, and it's certainly not to go to Newark Airport. I mean, come on. First of all, there's a train that goes to Newark Airport. Secondly, most of the people that go to Newark Airport, have their own car and can afford it. So anyway, that's where, yes, we know where we're coming from on that one, Fred, right?
We do. You have a link to another video from Rob Maurer at Tesla Daily talking about a leak of Tesla's next-gen FSD hardware, and he has some pretty detailed postings.
Yeah, I mean, they're we can complain about the name of the darn thing, which is atrocious. The fact that it is trying to address this enormously challenging problem of driving safely. And the issue is where do you want to do it, and what kind of computer hardware and software do you need to do it? And this whole argument, the whole focus on trying to do it everywhere is like goofy. Why don't you do it somewhere where it could provide some good and get it to work there, and then let's move to the next step. Okay, and to do it somewhere where it can provide some good under all the proper constraints and so on. No speeding, no speeding. In most places, people want to go 2, 3, 4 miles. They don't need to go 900 miles an hour, 70 miles an hour. And let's get this thing started so that we, after the 200 billion or whatever's been spent on the technology, we deliver some societal good out of this. Anyway.
Only one person among us is going over 900 miles an hour.
Well, no, I did have two Concorde flights, but
Okay. Our friend Ken Pyle at ViodiTV has posted a pretty comprehensive video of autonomous shuttles at January's CES. And as usual, Ken has a pretty good summary here.
Yeah, so if people want to, get a good feeling as to what was promoted at CES, I think he did a nice job with that.
And another friend, Brad Templeton, has launched a Robocars podcast. The more discussion here, the better, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess he must think we don't do a good job, so he has to go and, whatever. But, absolutely great, Brad asks good questions. He's certainly out there trying to do the right thing.
Yep. And Alan, you are the leadoff speaker for MIT's Mobility Forum, kicking off virtually tomorrow. Your topic, envisioning profitable autonomous transit networks. Congratulations, Alan.
Well, yeah, I guess it's nice that I was invited. And as we know, the approach that we've taken for all these years is to try to provide some mobility out of this, and really, at least we've ended up is realizing there's an enormous divide between the haves and the have-nots. Enormous. I mean, I can just walk out the kitchen door, hop in a car, and go whenever I want, almost wherever I want to go, because I do it for myself. If I had to charge myself or something like that, I mean, it'd be enormously expensive. If you have to have a chauffeur, I mean, unless you make a lot of money, it's enormously expensive. But of course, the argument's been is if we can, do it with a computer, and the computer it behaves as Moore's law, then at least the thought is its cost goes to zero. And now you can afford to maybe be able to give mobility, at least in some places, to everyone at a cost that's almost nothing. And then if you want to make it nothing, then you go subsidize that and make the price nothing, or make the price whatever you want. And you might even make money. Wouldn't it be amazing if transit made money? Right now the whole it only serves 3% of the nation's 1.1 billion trips a day. And each one of those things is subsidized at least, 75% or that. Luckily, it's not more. Otherwise, we'd be really bankrupt. And it's not because people haven't wanted to do it. Very bright people. My goodness, I spent a career trying to do it. Maybe not the brightest guy. And it just can't do it if you have to pay for somebody to wait for you and then take you. That's expensive. The reason why a cab ride from JFK is so darn expensive is some poor cabbie had to wait in the bullpen out there for who knows what, 3 hours to get a ride, and he or she deserves to make a living wage. That computer that Tesla and others are developing, and NVIDIA and all the others, it might be expensive today. GPS receivers were $80,000 back in the day. Now they're 80 cents. I don't know. That's what we'll talk about a couple of those things. Right. Hopefully everybody will boo me and grill me and whatever, and I'll get beat up, and I hope so anyway.
Well, there's a link in the newsletter. Anybody can attend. Yeah, you can register for it. Again, it's virtual. There's more info also at mobilityinitiative.mit.edu/events. We want to thank Missy for spending time with us and for all the terrific work that you're doing, Missy. We can't thank you enough.
Can't thank you enough, actually, and the experience you got by actually going into the lines then and being there. I've never done that. I've stayed in the Princeton bubble and been protected and don't have any sense of what reality is and whatever. But so nice to have you.
Well, thank you so much. And I was glad to do it. I learned a lot. I really appreciated my time at NHTSA. And, I think people need to appreciate that, regulatory agencies they're meant to move slowly on purpose, which is not always a bad thing. So I think that we're really kind of looking at a potential step change in how U.S. regulators approach anything with autonomy in it. And I think it's still a big, wide open space.
Thank you, Missy. Well, thank you to CARTS, the Corporation for Automated Road Transportation Safety, for helping to make this podcast possible. CARTS is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to safe and high-quality mobility for all. You can find us at smartdrivingcar.com, also on Anchor FM, Spotify, TuneIn, Amazon, Apple, Google, wherever you get your podcasts from. Your smart speaker can play us too. You can find my tech reports at textination.com. I'm Fred Fishkin along with Alan Kornhauser. Thank you for listening or watching. Please continue to stay safe.
Thank you so much, Missy.